Welcome. In this explainer, we're going to try and unravel the incredibly complex puzzle of what causes psychological disorders. We're going to dig into the science to really understand that deep interplay between our own biology and the world we live in.
So you might be asking, what's the one thing that truly causes mental illness? Well, that's kind of the trick question, isn't it? Because there isn't just one thing. Instead, it's this fascinating, intricate combination of factors. So let's piece together the science from the inside out and see if we can get the full picture.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start inside with our biological blueprint. Then we'll move outward to our family life, and then even wider to the societal pressures that shape us. And then, at the end, we'll put all those pieces together.
Okay, let's dive right in. I think the first and most important thing to get our heads around is that psychological disorders don't just pop up out of thin air. They're born from this dynamic mix of pre-existing vulnerabilities and environmental triggers. No single factor ever tells the whole story.
So let's start from the inside out, beginning with the very code of life we inherit from our parents, our genetics. This is our biological blueprint, and it can really set the stage for our entire mental health journey.
Now, to really get this, we need to separate two key ideas. First, you have your genotype. That's the specific genetic potential you inherit. But then you have your phenotype, which is how that potential actually gets expressed, the traits you can actually see. And here's the crucial part. People don't inherit a disorder itself. That's the phenotype. What they inherit is a genetic predisposition, a vulnerability, and that's the genotype.
So where do these genetic vulnerabilities come from? Well, they can show up in a couple of different ways. Sometimes the issue is with the entire chromosome, those big structures that hold all our DNA. Other times, it's much smaller, like a mutation in one specific gene that creates that predisposition. And we can see this difference in action with some really clear examples. Take Down syndrome. That results from an abnormality in a whole chromosome, chromosome 21. But then you have something like phenylketonuria, or PKU, which is a metabolic disorder caused by a defect in just a single gene. Both are perfect illustrations of how our genetic blueprint can set the stage. All right. Moving on from our genes, let's explore the brain's incredibly complex and, honestly, delicate communication system. This whole network runs on chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, and also hormones, which regulate pretty much everything, from our mood to how we respond to stress.
And what's really fascinating here is how imbalances in specific chemical messengers seem to be linked to specific disorders. For example, a lot of research suggests that low levels of serotonin can be associated with depression. And a deficiency in GABA, which is a neurotransmitter that helps calm the nervous system down, might just predispose someone to anxiety.
But it's not just about neurotransmitters. Our hormonal response to stress is also absolutely critical. This whole process is managed by something called the HPA axis. You can think of it as the command center for our fight or flight response. And when that system is constantly firing, maybe because of trauma or chronic stress, it can seriously heighten our vulnerability to anxiety and depression. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. We're moving from our internal biology to our most immediate and influential environment, the family. Our early family life is our first social world. It's where we learn to navigate everything, and it can either be a huge protective factor or, unfortunately, a source of major stress.
Now, research often looks at two types of challenging family structures. You have discordant families, which are intact but are full of conflict, criticism, and hostility. Then you have disrupted families, which are those that have gone through a structural break, like a divorce. The thing is, both of these can create really stressful, unstable environments that can deeply impact a child's psychological development.
And of course, parenting style itself is a huge factor. Supportive parenting gives kids the structure they need to grow and thrive. But when a parent is struggling with their own disorder, it can raise the risk for their child. And it's not just because of shared genetics, but also because the parent's condition can sometimes lead to inconsistent or, unskillful parenting.
Okay, now let's expand our view even further. Because beyond the family, we're all part of a larger society. And it has its own set of pressures and risk factors that can influence mental health on a massive scale.
These broader societal pressures can really increase the risk for psychological disorders. We're talking about things like the constant, grinding stress of poverty, the real harm caused by prejudice and discrimination, and even the environment of a dense, bustling city. All of these can add to a person's vulnerability.
And, to put that last point into perspective, a huge study in Sweden found something pretty remarkable. People living in the most urbanized environments had a 68 to 77% increased risk of diagnosed psychosis.
That's a staggering number, and a stark reminder of just how powerful our wider environment can be.
So we've got our biological blueprint on one side and our environment, everything from our family to our society on the other. So how in the world do we combine all these internal and external factors into one model that actually makes sense of it all?
Well, this brings us to a really key framework in psychology, the diathesis stress model. It's a simple, but honestly incredibly powerful way to understand mental illness. The basic idea is that a disorder develops when someone with a pre-existing vulnerability, that's the diathesis, which could be biological, runs into a major stressor in their environment. Think of it like a simple but really profound equation. You have an underlying vulnerability, let's say a genetic predisposition. Then you add an environmental trigger, like a traumatic event or some chronic hardship. It's the combination of these two things that creates the potential for a disorder to emerge. Neither part of that equation is solely responsible. It takes both. And all of this leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question. We've seen that both our biological inheritance and our life experiences are just so deeply intertwined in shaping our mental health. So, if that's the case, where should we focus our efforts for prevention and for intervention? Where do we have the most power to create positive change?